Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching once again. This is chapter 7 of Artemis Fowl. And just remember that your job is to follow along while I'm reading to you. You're watching this at this point because you enjoy the story, you're enjoying reading along with me. And if you're not, that's okay. I understand not every book is for everybody. So go ahead and find yourself a different book. Find something that you will enjoy reading, and no hard feelings about that, okay? So, with that in mind, here we go, Chapter 7, Mulch. Time to introduce a new character to our otherworldly pageant. Well, not strictly speaking a new character. We have encountered him before in the LEP booking line. On remand for numerous larcenies, Mulch Diggums, the kleptomaniac dwarf, a dubious individual even by Artemis Fowl's standards, as if this account didn't already suffer from an overdose of amoral individuals. Born to a typical dwarf cavern-dwelling family, Mulch had decided early that mining was not for him and resolved to put his talents to another use, namely digging and entering, generally entering mud people's property. Of course, this meant forfeiting his magic. Dwellings were sacred. If you broke that rule, you had to be prepared to accept the consequences. Mulch didn't mind. He didn't care much for magic anyway. There had never been much use for it down the mines. Things had gone pretty well for a few centuries, and he'd built up quite a lucrative above-ground memorabilia business. That was until he tried to sell the Jules Rimet Cup to an undercover LEP operative. From then on, his luck had turned, and he'd been arrested over 20 times to date, a total of 300 years in and out of prison. Mulch had a prodigious appetite for tunneling, and that, unfortunately, is a literal translation. For those unfamiliar with the mechanics of dwarf tunneling, I shall endeavor to explain them as tastefully as possible. Like some members of the reptile family, dwarf males can unhinge their jaws, allowing them to ingest several kilos of earth a second. This material is processed by a super-efficient metabolism, stripped of any useful materials, and ejected at the other end, as it were. Charming. At present, Mulch was languishing in a stone-walled cell in LEP Central. At least, he was trying to project an image of a languishing, unperturbed kind of dwarf. Actually, he was quaking in his steel-toed capped boots. The goblin-dwarf turf war was flaring up at the moment, and some bright spark LEP elf had seen fit to put him in a cell with a gang of psyched-up goblins. An oversight, perhaps. More likely a spot of revenge for trying to pick his arresting officer's pocket in the booking line. "So, dwarf," sneered the head honcho goblin, a wart-faced fellow covered in tattoos, "how come you don't chew your way out of here?" Mulch rapped on the walls. "Solid rock." The goblin laughed. "So what? Can't be any harder than your dwarf skull." His cronies laughed. So did Mulch. He thought it might be wise. Wrong. "You laughing at me, dwarf?" Mulch stopped laughing. "With you," he corrected. "I'm laughing with you. That skull joke was pretty funny." The goblin advanced until his slimy nose was a centimeter from Mulch's own. "You patronizing me, dwarf?" Mulch swallowed, calculating. If he unhinged now, he could probably swallow the leader before the others reacted. Still, goblins or murder on the digestion. Very bony. The goblin conjured up a fireball around his fist. "I asked you a question, Stumpy." Mulch could feel every sweat gland on his body pop into instant overdrive. Dwarves did not like fire. They didn't even like thinking about flames. Unlike the rest of the fairy races, dwarfs had no desire to live above ground, too close to the sun. Ironic for someone in the mud people possession liberation business. "No need for that," he stammered. "I was just trying to be friendly." "Friendly," scoffed Wartface. "Your kind don't know the meaning of the word. Cowardly backstabbers, the lot of you." Mulch nodded diplomatically. "We have been known to be a bit treacherous. A bit treacherous. A bit treacherous. My brother Flem was ambushed by a crowd of dwarves disguised as dung heaps. He's still in traction." Mulch nodded sympathetically. The old dung heap ruse. Disgraceful. One of the reasons I don't associate with the Brotherhood. Wartface twirled the fireball between his fingers. There are two things under this world that I really despise. Mulch had a feeling that he was about to find out what they were. One is a stinking dwarf. No surprises there. And the other is a traitor to his own kind. And from what I hear, you fall neatly into both categories. Mulch smiled weakly. Just my luck. Luck ain't got nothing to do with it. Fortune delivered you into my hands. On another day, Mulch might have pointed out that luck and fortune were basically the same thing. Not today. You like fire, dwarf? Mulch shook his head. Wartface grinned. Now ain't that a shame? 'Cause any second now I'm gonna ram this here fireball down your throat. The dwarf swallowed dryly. Wasn't it just typical of the dwarf brotherhood? What do dwarfs hate? Fire. Who are the only creatures with the ability to conjure fireballs? Goblins. So who did the dwarves pick a fight with? What a real no-brainer. Mulch backed up to the wall. Careful there, we could all go up. Not us, grinned Wartface, snorting the fireball up two elongated nostrils. Completely fireproof. Mulch was perfectly aware what would happen next. He'd seen it too many times in the back alleys. A group of goblins would corner a stray brother dwarf, pin him down, and then the leader would give him the double barrels straight in the face. Wartface's nostrils quivered as he prepared to vent the inhaled fireball. Mulch quailed. There was only one chance. The goblins had made a basic mistake. They'd forgotten to pin his arms. The goblin drew a breath through his mouth, then closed it. More exhalation pressure for the fire stream. He tilted his head back, pointing his nose at the dwarf, and let fly. Quick as a flash, Mulch jammed his thumbs up Wartface's nostrils. Disgusting, yes, but definitely better than being dwarf kebab. The fireball had nowhere to go. It rebounded on the balls of Mulch's thumbs and ricocheted back into the goblin's head. The tear ducts provided the path of least resistance, so the flames compressed into pressurized streams, erupting just below the goblin's eyes. A sea of flames spread across the cell roof. Mulch withdrew his thumbs and, after a quick wipe, thrust them in his mouth, allowing the natural balm in his saliva to begin the healing process. Of course, if he still had his magic, he could have just wished the scorched digits better, but that was the price you paid for a life of crime. Wartface didn't look so good. Smoke was leaking from every orifice in his head. Flame-proof goblins may be, but the errant fireball had given his tubes a good scouring. He swayed like a strand of seaweed, then collapsed face down on the concrete floor. Something crunched, probably a big goblin nose. The other gang members did not react favorably. Look what he did to the boss! That stinking stump! Let's fry him! Mulch backed up even further. He'd been hoping the remaining goblins would lose their nerve once their leader was out of commission. Apparently not. Even though it was most definitely not in his nature, Mulch had no option but to attack. He unhinged his jaw and leaped forward, clamping his teeth around the foremost goblin's head. "Ah, bag off!" he shouted around the obstruction in his mouth. "Bag off, or your friend gets it." The others froze, uncertain of their next move. Of course, they'd all seen what dwarf molars could do to a goblin head. Not a pretty sight. Each one popped a fireball in his fist. "I'm warning you. You can't get us all, Stumpy." Mulch resisted the impulse to bite down. It is the strongest of dwarf urges, a genetic memory born from millennia spent tunneling. The fact that the goblin was wriggling slimily didn't help. His options were running out. The gang was advancing, and he was as powerless as long as his mouth was full. It was crunch time. Pardon the pun. Suddenly, the cell door clanked open and what seemed like an entire squadron of LEP officers flooded the confined space. Mulch felt the cold steel of a gun barrel against his temple. "Spit out the prisoner," ordered a voice. Mulch was delighted to comply. A thoroughly slimed goblin collapsed, retching on the floor. "You, goblins, put 'em out." One by one the fireballs were extinguished. "That's not my fault," whined Mulch, pointing to the spasming wart face. "He blew himself up." The officer holstered his weapon, drawing out a set of cuffs. "I couldn't care less what you do to each other," he said, spinning Mulch and snapping the cuffs on. "If it was up to me, I'd put the whole lot of you in a big room and come back a week later to sluice it out. But Commander Root wants to see you above ground ASAP. ASAP? Now, if not sooner." Mulch knew Root. The commander was responsible for several of his government hotel visits. If Julius wanted to see him, it probably wasn't for drinks and a movie. "Now? But it's daylight now. I'll burn." The LEP officer laughed. "It ain't daylight where you're going, pal. Where you're going? It ain't anything." Root was waiting for the dwarf inside the time field portal. The portal was yet another of Foley's inventions. Fairies could be introduced to and leave the time field without affecting the altered flow inside the field. This effectively meant that even though it took nearly 6 hours to get Mulch to the surface, he was injected into the field only moments after Root had the notion to send for him. It was Mulch's first time in a field. He stood watching life proceed at an exaggerated rate outside the shimmering corona. Cars zipped by at impossible speeds, and clouds tumbled across the skyline as though driven by force 10 gales. "Mulch, you little reprobate," roared Root. "You can take off that suit now. The field is UV filtered. Or so I'm told." The dwarf had been issued a blackout suit at E1. Even though dwarves had thick skins, they were extremely sensitive to sunlight and had a burn time of less than 3 minutes. Mulch peeled off the skin-tight suit. "Nice to see you, Julius." "That's Commander Root to you." "Commander now, I heard that. Clerical error, was it?" Root's teeth ground his cigar to a pulp. "I don't have time for this impudence, convict. And the only reason that my boot is not up your behind right now is that I have a job for you." Mulch frowned. "Convict? I have a name, you know, Julius." Root squatted to the dwarf's level. "I don't know what dream world you live in, convict, but in the real world you are a criminal, and it is my job to ensure your life is as unpleasant as possible. So if you're expecting civility just because I've testified against you some 15 times, forget it." Mulch rubbed his wrist where the handcuffs had left red welts. "Fine, Commander, no need to blow a gasket. I'm not a murderer, you know, just a petty criminal." "From what I hear, you nearly made the transformation below in the cells." "Not my fault. They attacked me." Root screwed a fresh cigar into his mouth. "Fine, whatever. Just follow me and don't steal anything." "Yes, sir, Commander," said Mulch innocently. He didn't need to steal anything else. He'd already palmed Root's field access card when the commander had made the mistake of leaning over. They crossed the retrieval perimeter to the avenue. "Do you see that manor?" "What manor?" Root rounded on him. "I don't have time for this, convict. Nearly half my time stop has elapsed. Another few hours, and one of my best officers will be blue-rinsed." Mulch shrugged. "None of my concern. I'm just a criminal, remember? And by the way, I know what you want me to do, and the answer is no. I haven't even asked you yet. It's obvious. I'm a housebreaker. That's a house. You can't go in because you'll lose your magic, but my magic is already gone." 2 and 2. Root spat out the cigar. "Don't you have any civic pride? Our entire way of life is on the line here." "Not my way of life. Fairy prison, human prison, it's all the same to me." The commander thought about it. "Okay, you slime. 50 years off your sentence. I want amnesty. In your dreams, Mulch. Take it or leave it." Alright, I'm going to continue with another video in just a minute, so go ahead and click on that. Thanks for listening.